Eddie, stage is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Yanni. And pleasure to be here, everyone. And thank you very much for taking your time on a Wednesday afternoon to listen in. It shows that you're sacrificing the time. There's a clear growth mindset there, and everyone's here trying to get better and learn for the betterment of our players. So fantastic. We'll discuss on developing the future player. We'll discuss some observations I've had in Finland. First of all, you can just have a read of this. I'll explain a little bit. I think it's just really important we align and remember how lucky we are to be working with young players and what a big responsibility we have to help shape the football of tomorrow. But also, if our young players go on and do well and they represent the national team and the national team do well, then it's inspiring a nation, and it's big, it's massive. So it's beyond what we're doing on the pitch at times. And most importantly, we're influencing the lives of the young people that we all have the honour to work with. So I think that's massive. A little run through of today. We'll talk slightly about the purpose of the talent development scheme and myself as a talent coach, and a little bit on my coaching journey so far. Some observations in Finland, some things I've noticed is going on really well, some things I've noticed that we might be able to support and help, especially with the active learning time for players in training. We'll speak a little bit about the future game and what are the possibilities, because if we're coaching the future player, we need to maybe have an idea of what the future game might look like. And that's not necessarily meaning what it looks like now. If we're thinking we're working with U10s, in 12 years' time, they might be playing the game. You know, they might hit their peak in 16 years' time at 26 years old when the brain's fully formed, and it's the average age of a Premier League player, funnily enough. We'll talk a little bit about learning and a perspective to build some skill acquisition and some knowledge exchange and some just ideas on possible solutions. And we can share at the end, because I'm sure everyone else here is going to have some good solutions also, and there's already good practice going on. First of all, just to start, I just want you to take time. You can write it on a piece of paper or on your phone, or just 3 key things that you might want to get out of this presentation. And you can maybe shape those in questions. And if by the end of the presentation, we haven't spoke about those things, or you haven't got better insight into that, then please bottle it up and lend it back in a question, and we'll do our best to answer it, because like always, we want to help as much as possible. So there'll be a conclusions and questions section at the end. So if you take a little bit of time to just think about some key things that you want to get out of this, because this is about you and your players, most importantly. So first of all, just a small introduction into the talent development scheme and myself as a talent coach. This 6 months has been a pilot, because we're going to have 23 more FIFA talent coaches at overall 30 different countries that are specifically outside the top 25 of the FIFA World Rankings, to support as accelerators of talent development by setting up either regional or national centres where we get what we feel are the potential best players with the best, where we increase contact time so there's a good amount of training time, and we have a good quality process where it's a high performance environment. So we went into 7 different MAs, 7 different countries. One of them was obviously Finland. I've got colleagues in South Africa, Venezuela, Costa Rica, Benin, Fiji, Kyrgyzstan, really different places to just test our possible interventions for the future. Obviously, there's more infrastructure in Finland at the moment, where we have academy environments, we have talent coaches in clubs, we have regional and national activities. So my role in Finland's been more about being in some of the clubs and encouraging a more player-centered approach, looking at maximising time during training sessions and knowledge exchange and a bit of coach mentoring. So that's where we've been at. But the main goal is to help match up or help increase global competitiveness of football, so every single talent has a chance, no matter where you're born, no matter what month you were born, no matter whether you're a boy or girl, or no matter what religion or belief your family has, every talent should have a chance at having a high performance environment. So that's our goal, and really we want one day to have, maybe it'll be a different team that goes on and wins the World Cup rather than the same maybe South American and European teams, the ones that have won it a lot. Let's get another nation up there. So that's the overall idea of the project. Before we move on to the next slide, when I start a little bit about coaching journey so far, if you could write down your 3 football coaching idols, who really inspires you to be the best football coach you can be, whoever it is. So just have a little think for 10 seconds, and then I'll share a little bit. So which football coaches do you really idolize? So here's my answers. I'll speak about maybe 3 of them. Chris Ramsey, the biggest bubble there in the QPR outfit. He's probably one of the best developers I've seen of young players on a real individualized approach. And he's been a first team manager, but he's worked with the England youth teams, and just real specific. And every player in his sessions has an individual outcome, no matter what the age. And he's just phenomenal, especially with the young ones. And then Ricardo Moniz in the bottom right, Dutch coach, one of the best skills coaches I've ever seen. And I don't mean skills as tricks just to go past people all the time, but like all the different types of skills: receiving, releasing, retaining, regaining, running with the ball. Incredible, real inspiration. And if you just Google Ricardo Moniz training session on YouTube, you'll know what I mean. And then one that I actually don't know personally, but I still idolize him, is Paul McGuinness from Manchester United, where the class of 92, so Paul Scholes, David Beckham, the Neville brothers, like that, come through where he was part of that as a coach, and so many players have come through Man United. And the reason I describe them is just to share with you why these type of people are my coaching idols, because I don't necessarily idolize and want to be Pep Guardiola or De Zerbi or Pochettino. I respect them for what they're doing, but I know I'm a developer of young players and I want to be world class at that. So that's why I idolize these people. So if you have a little reflect onto who you really idolize as a coach, think about why, and think about whether that reflects what you want to do in the future and where you want to be. Like I say, we can always learn from everyone, but thinking about who I really want to aspire to be like, these people are phenomenal. And if I can help as many players, or even half the amount of players that they've helped, then I would be a very, very happy person. So yeah. And then I just think I'm really grateful to be here, obviously working for FIFA, but I just think I've been really lucky, to be honest with you. I played for 3 of those clubs, 3 of those many clubs that we have in London, and definitely not the high level ones. And I live smack bang in the middle of Arsenal, Tottenham and West Ham. They're literally 20 minutes in either direction. So that football culture has been massive. And I've been really lucky at a young age to get coached by some great football people. So I learned quite well. I wasn't maybe the greatest physically, I could manage technically, but it was just special to be coached by them and then get into coaching quite early. So I went out, upon being released at a young age, I went to a college program here, which was players that were released by clubs or quite good local players that would train every day and study. And then from there, after 2 years there, I went out to America on a soccer scholarship. And luckily, my old academy manager was the head of recruitment at Tottenham Hotspur at the time. So it was an option for me to go in and learn from the coaches. Still had my mind on playing at the time, but then I've really got a thirst for coaching and a hunger to learn and develop. So a lot of my great learning come at the time when Spurs were changing everything. They were going in a more individualized approach. They were focusing on, England, we used to just shell the ball long and hit the channel 4-4-2, and Spurs were one of the first teams with the young ages to start playing and start having a real philosophy of total football for development. Not just possession, but total football for development with purposeful possession is one of the principles. From there, I was working with the foundation phase, so 7 to 12-year-olds, development centres when they were just before the academy and helping them in the academy a little bit. Then went over to Queen's Park Rangers Football Club with the U13s, and then ended up after a couple of years leading the phase, so 12 to 16-year-olds, and then moved on to the professional development phase, 17 to 21-year-olds, so young pros, and spent a long time at Queen's Park Rangers and through both them clubs, and a little bit of time at Brentford, and I was at Leyton Orient for a little bit as well. Have been really lucky to work in and see players go from 7 years old all the way to the first team and at all levels. And lucky enough to have guys that were playing international football last night, playing in all competitions across all levels, which is a real honour. And then done a little bit of coach education with the FA, and also was, again, really lucky to be selected for the elite coach apprenticeship scheme with the Premier League, where you have opportunities to go away once a month to high performance environments like British cycling, or I went out to the Bollettieri Tennis Academy in the States, and just really go and learn and try and see what we can take into the football world, and also go and study other academies. So I've been lucky enough to be out to academies across 4 continents and see what development looks like, along with myself going to South America for a year and studying football out there. So just been lucky to have a journey where people have really helped support my development, and I've gone after it and really tried to learn as much as I can. So that's enough on the journey. And then obviously the opportunity with FIFA came around, and a project ran by Arsene Wenger, and I'm an Arsenal fan, so it was and he's an amazing mind and person, so it's a real honour to be working in a project that he's heading up. So yeah, observations in Finland so far. If I was a scout for a club, and if Brexit wasn't a thing anymore, I'd definitely be sending or going to Finland to have a look at goalies, because I think the level is outstanding. So goalkeeper coaches got to give yourselves a real big pat on the back and commend you for it. And it's testament. I think the Brentford B team goalkeeper coaches from Finland also, and there's a few goalkeeper coaches abroad from Finland. I know the National Hockey League in the States has a good amount of goalkeepers, so maybe there's something in there about how the process is in developing people that protect the goal. But some observations that I've seen that I think we can really bottle up and learn from is that every single goalkeeper training session I've seen is specific and it's situational. So it's based on the goalkeeper's needs, and it's based on real situations from the game. And also the feedback is individual, and the feedback is often. So I see the coaches like get real specific with their feedback, real specific about what might be the most efficient way for the goalkeepers with the hand shapes and body position and things like that. And every session I've seen, the GoPro's behind the goal. So the goalkeeper coach is getting better because they're always able to reflect on their practice. And also the goalkeepers are getting even better because they have instant opportunity to go back and watch it, or there's that interaction between player and coach where the coach might send some clips. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it still needs to develop to be a strength that you guys really maximise, that we really maximise in this country. But in regards to the ability to build up and provoke the press and play out, sometimes maybe we need to see where the furthest, most comfortable pass is. But honestly, I've been so impressed. So I feel like, how can we try and bottle up some of that? It might not be exactly the same, but when I see some of the players warming up and doing stuff that isn't specific and situational, then I look over by the goal, and the goalkeepers, whilst the other outfield players are doing something not so specific and situational, the goalkeepers are working on their game. So it might make sense why they kind of are getting better. So that's something to think about. From November, I had a discovery visit, and I started looking at some of the sessions. And one thing I was looking at was the coaching detail is okay, it's right. But I was just thinking about the amount of time during the sessions that the players are actually active, and the amount of time that the ball is rolling. So they're learning from doing. And then I looked at a few different areas that I thought, just so I can make sure that what I'm seeing is right, I tried to make sure I was objective with my analysis. So I ended up analysing about nearly 50 or well, more than 50 sessions. These are the results from the first 15. And I looked at ball rolling time, the amount of time that the practice was posed, the amount of times where goals were included, because at the end of the day, the game involves 2 goals, and it's about creating goals and scoring goals or stopping goals. I looked at the amount of time was spent on a warm-up, especially warm-ups that were, like I say, not specific, not situational, and maybe like very linear and without the ball. I looked at a very subjective rate of perceived exertion. That was from me just thinking about how intense the session looked. Looked at session focus and looked at if we felt or it looked like the learning was scaffolded. So what we do in activity 1, whether it's warm up or an activity, how that links to the whole picture, how that links to activity 2, activity 3, activity 4, and the players learning if it's built, with a process. And then I looked at if there was dual coaching methods. So if there's 2 or 3 coaches working together, how do they work together effectively? Within that, one of the biggest things that stood out for me was the ball rolling time. So if you have a look, to put in perspective, our DNA in England was or is trying to make sure that sessions have a minimum of 70% ball rolling time. So since I've been in Finland, I've still yet to see one of those. The highest I did see before some intervention and helping coaches so far, the highest I saw before any intervention with coaches was about 62% ball rolling time. So that's something to think about, with the lowest being quite low. I saw as low as 30% ball rolling time, where a lot of work was done on maybe injury prevention and things like this, but maybe that can be done apart from the session, so away from the session, not as a part of the session. So because the time we have with the players is sacred, it's really valuable in trying to get them better at real football actions. So this was analysis of the first 15 sessions, and it's very similar, unless, like I say, we've done certain coach interventions and helped them with some ideas and solutions. It pretty much is in and around the 40 to 60 mark with ball rolling time. So if we think we're training for 10 years, less than half of the time, the ball is actually rolling, so 46% of the time what the players are doing. So that's something to think about. Warm-up time ended up being about a third. So we train for 10 years, we're warming up for 3. And I'm not saying that warm-ups aren't important, because they are. You need to get the body ready, you need to get the mind ready. However, can it be a real specific preparation for training? And if there is, like I say, any injury prevention stuff to do, that can be done. But that can be, if you're training for an hour and a half, that can maybe be done 15 minutes before or 15 minutes after. So you have 90 minutes of football. So even if you're going and you have 30 minutes on the side of the pitch, that can still be intentional and still help the players become better at real football action. So that we'll talk about that later. Opposed practice ended up being 62%, which is not the end of the world. That's not bad at all. Maybe we can push that up a little bit, just depending on the players' obviously age and stage of development and what they need. Session focus, and you guys can maybe think about your sessions. Just over half of the sessions were on opening phase, build-up play. I see so much build-up play. This is not just in Finland, by the way. Even if I go to watch sessions at clubs in England, there's a lot on the build-up, a little bit on the playing through midfield, and not much on actually scoring goals. And the reality, because the reality sometimes is actually that they have more players in their box than you have, and you might have to score when you're underloaded. So that's something to think about. And then 30% were maybe mixed content, or where there wasn't really a clear outcome, I've seen on rate of perceived exertion in Turku, I saw an 8. I saw an 8 out of 10, maybe even approaching 9. A very good session put on by the talent coach in Turku. Timo. So that had great outcomes for the players, real individual outcomes, and I saw they were really in a good physical state where there's a good amount of emotion in what they're doing, and they're at times a little bit tired and thinking, oh, I've really got to push to do one more here, or I've really got to go somewhere to do better. So because there's implications on the development of the strength of their mind there as well, not just physical. And then the inclusion of goals, under half used goals. Put in perspective, you've got clubs in Denmark that actually that they will not do practices without goals, you know, so it's about thinking about how we can maybe balance that off. So those are some observations, and then just getting into touches on the ball. I looked at 2 sessions and used this software called Player Maker, where it measures how many touches the players get, amongst some other things, and just tried to get 2 groups of the same age, tried to get 2 groups that were maybe working on similar things, and looked at one session. And this session was on the left, was on a Monday, where the group did not have a game on the weekend, so they're completely fresh. And the other session was on a Friday, the one on the right, where actually they had a game the next day. And what I'd done working with the coach, we led the session, but led it with some of the solutions or little tools that we might speak about later, but just making sure really that the warm-up is intentional and there's touches on the ball that's relating to the outcomes of the practice, and making sure that we didn't waste any time with session setup, making sure that we didn't go right into 8v8 or 11v11, that we built it up and had smaller sided and underloaded and overloaded situations for the players' needs. And if you have a look at just the difference in the touches on the ball, if we're saying that we have one session that's maybe built more towards that DNA of having 70% ball rolling time, and another session that might be a little bit more typical of what I've seen in Finland, and that's not to say everywhere, but this is just one example. You see maybe there's a difference in about 400 touches on the ball. And if you're training 4 times a week, the maths goes to about 1,600 touches on the ball, 1,600. And if you train for 10 weeks, then you're looking at 160,000, sorry, 16,000, and then times that by the whole year, and then it goes on and on and on. And if you're looking at a 12-year journey of a player from U7s or U8s right up until U20s, when they're maybe breaking through the door, it will add up, right? So even if on the right side, my coaching detail, maybe I wasn't at it, maybe I had a poor session in regards to some of the pictures I saw and some of the learning for the players, the amount of actions the players got, and maybe the amount of subconscious learning the players got with the session on the right, plus the amount of activity where they're doing and their love for the game because they're active, and you know, it's a big difference. So something to look at. And like I say, look, I've seen sessions in Finland also where there's been 350 touches on the ball and things like that. So there has been other examples of good practice. This is just to demonstrate. This was just a random Friday and a Monday where I looked at it. So that's something to think about, and how we can try and help to maybe shift the left session on the left side, but a little bit more to the right. And obviously it's not just about touches on the ball. There has to be clear intention towards your learning, but something to think about there, thinking about what type of players we want to create to deal with that future game that we'll speak about a little bit in. So showed this slide earlier, but I think it's really important because as coaches, we especially when we're working with the younger players, we need to really think they're not playing the game of today. So if we go and look at De Zerbi doing some really amazing things like dropping 2 pivots in and getting his 9 in with the 10 and making a box and the wingers high, and if we look at all these things and say, oh yeah, I want to go and practice that, it's like, what are we developing? Are we developing better players, or are we developing coaches that can practice coaching the men's or women's football really well? So, and honestly, in the past, I've done exactly the same thing. I've seen Guardiola roll the fullback in and be like, oh yeah, I want to try that. We get an extra player in midfield now. Great. Okay, well, now my under 14s get used to playing with one more player. Now what happens when they go to the first team and they're playing in a 3 against a 3 or a 2 against a 3? They can't manage it. So that's something to think about how we really structure what we do to help the players, and thinking about maybe the future game and what it might look like. The interesting thing is the future anyway is it's a VUCA world, right? So is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. So it's very difficult to say, all right, the game is going to look like this. But there might be some things that we can learn from recent changes that might help shed light onto what the game might look like in the future. So if we look at some recent developments and we look at the number of subs, and this might be for players that are working with older players a little bit, but number of subs, now we have 5 subs instead of 3. Now more frontline players are getting taken off. So if you ain't scored a goal in 70 and it's 0-0, you know you're getting dragged off and someone else is coming on. And if you're a striker, you actually have to be ready to really grab those 30 minutes or grab those 30 minutes and make something happen. And that also might influence then physically the type of capabilities and repeated sprints and things like that. That already changes the dynamic, and those rules could change again. And if you're a defender and you're consistently every single game playing, whether it's halftime, whether it's 75th minute, or whether it's the 85th minute, you know you're going to play against an opponent that is completely fresh most of the time for a period of time. You know that your concentration levels need to be really high. You know that your ability to adapt and play against different opponents within games need to be really high. So that's already one small change on the number of subs that has really changed maybe the way football is going to look in the future and the capabilities of the players in the future. When we look at now the tactical flexibility and some hybrid formations that we're seeing in the game, you know, we have now John Stones as the reinvented libero, where he now goes into midfield. So, wow, all right, we've got a centre mid now that steps into midfield, and they create a 3-4-3, you know, and but they're so flexible, Man City. And then at times, you know, you see whether it was Chelsea last season or Brighton the season before, having different formations within the game. You know, so we're really going to have to make sure not that our players are tactical geniuses, but that they're adaptable and they really have the tools to adapt their game, play in different spaces and have different solutions for different problems. And I believe with the advances technologically and also with the use of data analytics and algorithms, we're going to see even more adaptability and tactical flexibility, because even at halftime now, some of you might even do it if you're working with older players, and even with the younger ones, just to show for their learning process. You might be in a position where you can show clips at halftime. You might be in a position where if you're in the first team, they've got so much data on the opponent about where their goals come from, when they score. And so you might be adapting so much based on your opponent. So something to think about. And that's just me talking about 3 recent developments. So one thing is that it's so unpredictable. And another thing is that we don't even know what the normal future is going to look like, let alone football. But we just know that we're going to have certain tools, or we're going to have to adapt. But certain things don't change. The fundamentals of the game will not. The fundamentals that the players need will not change. Maybe the speed at which they need to execute will change. However, the ability to receive the ball, the ability to retain the ball as an individual and collectively, the ability to run with the ball, release the ball and regain the ball, that will not change. And I feel coaches that are working with those real younger ages, that is huge, how we develop those 5 key things. And then also within that, okay, then how can I dominate my opponent 1v1? And how maybe do I dominate and play differently against different opponents? And then, like I said earlier, most goals are scored in the box where the opposition have more numbers than you. So if they have more numbers than us, then how much am I training underloaded when I have the ball and I have two defenders in front of me and run recovery defender and maybe a support coming late? Because that's training in the final third, really, isn't it? Rather than there's two of us and one of them, and I've got loads of time, all the time in the world without anyone recovering. So just that importance of that adaptability. But one thing that doesn't change is the fundamentals. Cool. So I just want us to have a look at this video and just have a think to yourself what it means to you and what you see. Okay. Don't imagine you thought that English guy from FIFA presenting on football would show animals playing, but it's very important to understand. I feel to understand how animals learn and us being animals as well, and the importance of play and why it's a necessity, especially for the animals. They're playing. If you notice the young lion is biting the neck of the other one, and there's guys that are trying to practice pouncing and things like that. That's ingrained in us. That's instinctual. Young animals, including us, will learn through play, will learn through exploring the world in their way, and sometimes at their times when it fits them. And obviously, as coaches, we try and put constraints to help support that play and get different outcomes. But it's a real necessity, a real necessity. And for those animals, it's about practicing survival, right? And with that, those times, those are ages that we're working with, which we would call the golden age of learning, like you've all probably seen on courses. That's when we have peak motor control velocity. So the time where our neurons and our neural pathways are getting developed and are just firing. And we're a sponge. So all those situations of play can really help bed down some important tools that can be used later on in life. However, the way it's done is so important, that we're understanding what we're training. So if you look at the difference in the processing speed of the more instinctual brain, like the animal in you, I guess, or some people call it the chimp brain, and what you call the human brain, the one that's more analytical and thinks a little bit slower, but cannot really react as fast, to certain situations. Whereas you have your fast brain that has a processing speed of 100,000 miles per hour compared to 100 and 150 miles per hour. So if you're always stopping the session and saying, put your body like this, look over here, and giving so much information, I'm not saying it's a wrong thing now and again, but you want to think about how much you can set it up where the players are using that fast brain and they're getting pictures, because that's what they're going to go to when they play the game. Their brain's not going to go and be able to break down the process so slowly. It's going to refer back to pictures and experience, so it's about really trying to train that subconscious and finding the balance between implicit and explicit learning within our training sessions. And I'm not saying that explicit learning is not beneficial. However, when you look at the studies especially at these ages, developing those abilities, those fundamentals: receive, retain, release, run with, regain the ball. Those fundamentals, a lot of it is going to come from that implicit side of it, that real fast brain where they're learning from experience, and there's real consequences in the learning. So it's obvious. I've gone 1v1. I haven't gone past the player. I've lost it. I have to go and get the ball back. Now I'm going to try something different. Now I'm going to try something else, and just keep putting them in the situation with maybe 1 or 2 little points, not necessarily stopping it and taking 30 seconds, a minute for a coaching intervention where they could have already got 5 reps in there. Might be more the way to go. So really trying to balance that, balancing the fast brain and the slow brain. And when you look at the speed at which decisions need to be made, especially in the final third, you know, in the build-up, you might be able to take a breath and be a bit more analytical and really notice where the players are and think, all right, there's maybe a solution there next time. But it happens so fast in the final third, in and around the goal, that there's no way you're going to be able to be so analytical there. It's going to have to be so instinctive and so subconscious what you're doing. So really balancing how much we're getting the players to think fast and how much we're getting them to think slow, and what the importance is of each. Because when you look at the world's best, they would say that during the games, then they're not really so consciously thinking. They're more subconscious. They're more, I guess, on autopilot, especially in the final third. When you look at people like Neymar in the 1 versus 1, and they're doing studies on what part of his brain he's using, and it's mainly, it's all fast brain, it's autopilot. So that's because he's trained the situation so much, and not necessarily, he won't necessarily, or Maradona won't necessarily be able to tell you, when I run with the ball, I do this with my right foot, I do this with my left. Then they just had the situation over and over and over again. It's not to say 1 or 2 coaching points don't help, but if you balance it, would you rather loads of situations for player learning with maybe a few constraints, or stop, stand still after every 2 goes of 1 versus 1s and the coach explains, and so it's trying to really find that balance. But if you look at the world's best, they're on that fast brain because they've had so many situations when they were younger. And then in just looking at the science of it, even with any kind of presentation or a session, or like, the retention rates of the students are going to come more from when they're doing, and even more if they're able to maybe show others some little tips on how they do it. If they're just hearing things, they're maybe only getting 20% of the information, or remembering 20% of the information. So the ability to do and practice doing and be active in that learning process is massive. And then just moving on to a little bit more on age-specific learning. When we look at these 4 images, you can think to yourself what you see for a few seconds. And then if you look on the right side, we maybe see the master painter, the finished product. And then we go more to the left, and you see the two young ladies. They may be at different stages of their learning. Maybe the one at the bottom is still a bit more on an exploration stage, and maybe the one at the top is a little bit more structured. So you might look at your U16s or U15s kind of area, and the one at the bottom, maybe U12, where you're starting to really put things together. And, like in football, where you're understanding maybe at U11s, a single unit. So maybe a unit of 2 players, and then you go to, all right, we'll go a unit of 3 or 4, and U12s, U13s, how my unit relates to another unit, and that real understanding of space. But then in the picture on the left, that's where we're working, right? With the U7s, U8s, U9s, U10s, U11s, U11s and U10s maybe, or U11s, U12s maybe slightly more to the middle, but it doesn't have to look like the final product. And we can't expect it to look like the final product. So if I take a U9s and we've got or U10s and we're playing 8v8 and I've got 3 clear lines and the spaces and the balance and everything is so neat and tidy and great, and we win the ball from creating 2v1s or using a touchline as our friend, and or we invite it to one player and then we go and pounce in a certain area. Like, that's great. But that's maybe great for the young lady in the middle at the top, and definitely for the master painter at the end. But for them, maybe they need more messy. Maybe it needs to be, or it does need to be more messy, so they can really learn, so they can maybe go player for player and learn how to deal with your opponent, learn how to manage and defend in big spaces. And then the other more structured stuff can maybe come a little bit later. And that's same with their stuff in possession. They can experiment, they can practice, they can be messy, they can really figure it out. They can find out what they are brilliant at. Because if we put the players in a box too early and say, you must pass the ball here, you must move the ball here, like, we're never going to find their genius, and everyone's got something special. So just thinking about that approach of our young players, how we can really help them explore what they are brilliant at and maximize that. And most definitely the under-9s game is completely different to the under-12s game. And the under-12s game is completely different to the U15, 16 game. And the U16 game is different to the adult game. So there's stages in the learning. So we wouldn't expect these painters to be doing the same thing. So we can't expect our footballers to want to do the same thing. So this goes out to maybe where our focus is. And look, if I was working with a first team and in that world and it was winning at all costs, you'll see you'll probably be in the bottom left corner where results in team are the most important. And then if you're looking at working with young players, you're thinking, what corner do you want to be in? So is it about the process and the team? So we focus a lot on the team and game understanding, how we work collective, or is it about the process and the individual? So the individual's got to understand how to operate within a team, but we focus on development through the assessment of individual need. And this is from Chris Ramsey, like I said, one of my mentors and a fantastic human being. This is where I've been educated, and this is where I've seen players just really thrive from it. So I'll give you a video of a few players, because I've been talking loads and it's always good to watch football. So we'll just have a look at this video next. 3 players that have gone through development program that caters for the individual and caters for the process.
Avançou muito no terreno. Bom passo para Marcos Edwards. Mais uma vez a libertar aqui o adversário a rodar à frente de outro. Edwards para dentro da grande área. Vitória, tirou! Marcos Edwards também entra nas combinações. Deixa Filipe Augusto para trás. Edwards kommer fri. Mulighed her til Sporting. Bissett. Og det er Fernandes. Gui. Antecipou se Daniel Bragança. Edwards. Den mata de Edwards.
That's space. You'll go for the shot.
Conscious of time. So just to reflect on those guys, Marcus, for example, is one player that I saw at Tottenham, and he actually wasn't in any of my age groups or at my development centre, but he was such a phenomenal young player that I saw from when he was like 8, and you saw the ability he had. And the interesting thing is, at Spurs at the time, a lot of the training was really 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, 4v4s, and never really went above 4v4 up until like U12. So the only time they were playing more than 4v4 was their games on the weekend. And then his development continues. And Ibire, for example, Marcus is at Sporting Lisbon at the moment, and he'll probably, hopefully, push and get an England call-up one day. Ibire just got his England call-up and made his England debut. And that's a player that just got released by so many clubs. But when he came into QPR, we really focused on maximising his strengths, which was, he's a great runner with the ball, great dribbler. So we really worked on that. And at a young age, he was just playing so much street football, to be honest. And he just loved the ball, just was always with the ball. So that's where the focus for them has been solely on development through individual needs. when they've been in around the programs that I've been involved in. And here's some ideas, I guess, to share about how we can maybe help really create an environment to help players like that flourish in all different positions and all different types. So I'd say definitely, if you're playing 8v8, you're playing 8v8, play it on a Saturday. Let's get some real smaller sided practices with the players, and making sure we have duel-based practices. Even if you're working on something else, at least a part of the session, get them to have some duels where they're going at each other and it's me versus you, and it's competitive. And then focus on assessment for individual needs, like we say. So players are really working on stuff that they want to get better at. There's an intention on their training individually. How we can maybe increase the demands and intensity from the players. So a rule of thumb I've always used is first of all, if you've got 4-a-side, 4v4, play for 4 minutes, and then maybe that's a bit of a guideline. But if they're not blowing, and if they're not really a bit tired and stuff, then let them go for a little bit more, or tell them to press a little bit harder and make the space a little bit bigger so they can be blowing. Or if you're doing another type of ball manipulation practice or something, let's make sure that they're really working. So it's that if they can manage the skill, let's make sure it's really sharp, really intense. And then stop. Once you see they're a little bit tired, stop, and then give them some coaching points. So the recovery is not just for recovery in dead time. The recovery is so you can coach. And then being efficient with session setup. So that warm up, let's make it count. So let's make it be part of the session. So you can warm up loads with flexibility with the ball, with kick ups and different ball manipulation exercises and passing practices. With, if you need to do certain mobility, then do it in between. But also the players need to be responsible for doing their own mobility, maybe at home, and stretching and things like that. In regards to the score, there has to be a real intention about what we're trying to achieve. So I went to, for a week, I asked at one club, I asked all the coaches that were coaching the sessions that I watched, what's the score? They couldn't tell me. And I asked the players, what's the score when they're playing small-sided games? And they couldn't really tell me much. Something. If there's a real intention, like, how do we know what we're trying to achieve? If we're losing 2-0, how are we going to attack? If we're winning 2-0, how are we going to defend? You know, what happens if I lose? Is there a little consequence? How can we make it tasty? And then how can we maybe maximize the use of goals within training sessions? So if we're doing a passing practice, to really get these final third players, you know, if we're doing a passing practice, can we focus with a finish at the end so it's intentional? Can possession-based and transitional practices have elements into goals? So I see a lot of the rondos. If the two in the middle win it, can they go and score in a goal? And sometimes these great goalkeeper coaches working with the goalkeepers, can you get a striker in to do some finishing as well, some crossing? So there's a few ideas on some knowledge exchange. And then please, if we just remember that the game is the game, like it's just an extension of the training program for the players. That's all it is. So whatever we want those players to individually get better at, or collectively, if we want them better at working in units, depending on their age and stage, the game, that's just an extension of it. And let's set challenges within the game to help that. It's not about winning the game 10-0 at U9s. If you go 2 or 3-0 up, okay, maybe rotate positions a little bit, maybe get a touch limit, or, you know, be creative. And lastly, I see some people do this. Let's really set homework with the players as well. So they're working with the ball all the time, the kick-up challenges, kick-ups with a tennis ball, turns, first touch work, all different surfaces. Because that stuff, when you do the different surfaces, it really helps with them fluidity and mobility anyway. And then a couple more little bits to think about. Can we think about maybe with the ball rolling time on the left, get our interventions really short and snappy. And those interventions might be in 10 words or less. And like I say, maybe when they're blowing. Another idea, maybe while the game's going on, rather than stopping the whole practice, just pull one of the players aside and talk to him and set them a challenge, or her and set them a challenge, or give them a little bit of feedback. Maybe when the players go in for a drinks break, if before they go in for the drinks break, you say, all right, we're going to go in for the drinks break. You have your drink, but when you get back, I want to see the first one to be able to do knee, head 10 times, or outside of the right, inside of the right, outside of the right. I want you to try that doing kick-ups 10 times, or a certain turn or a certain skill, you know, that's what you're going to come in and practice. Then they might go get their drinks. Wow, I've got a challenge. And they come back in. Or, you know, if you maybe getting the teams set up for the game. So try and do that maybe when they're doing a challenge. So, all right, guys, little passing practice or a little challenge with the ball. Just go around and get their bibs on. So there's no dead time in the training session. They're always active. And moving down to the individual plan on negotiables, just making sure that each player has an intention that they want to get better at, or a learning objective for the session. And these intentions are differentiated based on the player's needs. And they have an opportunity to practice these within the session. So you might be working on a certain aspect. You may be working on your 1v1 defending, or your ability to work and defend in a 2. And then one of the outcomes for the players is about his ball striking on his left foot. Well, if he hasn't got a lot of that, then maybe there's 10 minutes for them at the end to go and work on that. And just on the RPE, remember, different players can get pushed physically differently. So there might be some that have come in from school and they've done PE at school, and their bodies are they've maybe done a little bit more. So we still push them, but we understand that, all right, we might not be able to push this player as much as the other player. And the other player, we really push them because they're quite fresh. You know, there might be some players in your age groups, if you're working at U12s, that are going through rapid growth. All right, so we have to maybe use them as a bouncer on the side a little bit more, but they can still train. So, but really, you'd rather have to turn the gas down on your sessions than rather up. You know, you want really, really high demands from the players. And then just some examples before I move on, because I'm just looking at time. Some examples of some things we work with at FIFA with four principles of nonlinear pedagogy. And these are not all the principles, but here's just 4 that I thought are really quite important. First of all, we spoke about a constraints-based approach. If you look at Newell's model in the top left corner of the individual task environment and ecological dynamics, is so important. We're understanding how we can set challenges and constraints to help player learning, and also making sure that there's adapted variability. So after 10 minutes or so on one thing, especially with the young players, you might need to change it more. The brain will get a bit lazy, will get a bit accustomed to doing one thing. So it needs to be challenged differently, whether that be the space, or whether that be the task, or whether that be the amount of players on the team. Like, just add something or change something where the players are challenged differently. If you think about that future game and we want adaptable players, if our session has a good amount of adaptation, not too much so it goes too crazy, but if we are able to adapt within the session, the players can do that, fantastic, because we're thinking about the future game as well as getting them into an optimal learning state. Then also making sure that what we're doing is representative of the game. So it's a representative design. So that doesn't mean it has to look like the game all the time and you go and play a full game, but it's really relating to solving a real life problem in the game. So that can be with one player and a ball, fair enough. But can it be one player and a ball and maybe some passive pressure to start with for what they need, and then real pressure, and then, you know, doing it in the area of the pitch where that's going to happen in the game. So the body and the subconscious also are used to operating those actions within that area of the pitch. Really, really huge. And then lastly, just making sure as much as we can that the feedback that the players engage in is more external than internal. So it's more, if I'm trying to put the ball in the bottom corner, I can just have a cone between the post and the corner, and I try and put the ball in there. And if it doesn't go in there, I'll try another couple of times and I'll try and adapt myself. And then if it doesn't, then maybe the coach makes it a little bit bigger. Then they're able to hit that and it will go in, and it will be, they'll learn a groove and learn a technique. And then maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller, then a little bit smaller, and then maybe 1 or 2 little points. But every player is going to have their own way of interacting with the world, and maybe their own way of finding that ball into that corner. And it's about us helping them discover that, rather than them always thinking, oh, I must put my standing leg here, I must strike the ball here, I must, because their body's different to our body. So the way I do something might be different to the way Yanni does something. But it's about us helping the players discover that, maybe with more external feedback rather than internal. And that's always also going to help the players' perception and being able to see and sense, you know. That's not to say that giving some certain tips and pointers for the players with some internal bits isn't important. Cool. 2 more slides and then some questions. I want us to think about these 2 practices. If we've done the practice on the left for 10 years with some adaptation, but done these rondo type practices a lot, where you have support all the time, you have the opportunity to play first, second and third line passes, and there's no goals, or you play 3v3 with goalkeepers, so maybe 4v4, different size pitches, different shapes, different constraints, different rules, maybe where if you miss, you've got to recover through a certain area or go off and do 10 kick-ups before you get back on the pitch. So there's 3 versus 2s for a certain amount of time, overloaded, underloaded. If we play these 2 games and we take a case study of 2 different academies, and one academy does these rondo type practices on the left, and I'm not saying they're wrong because they have outcomes, and the other academy only does these type of dual-based practices on the right. We do that from the age of 6 to 16 years old. Where are the scouts going to go for the players? Who are going to have the better players with 10 years of training? Something to think about. Cool. And I'm going over time and I want to leave enough for questions. So I'm going to race through. Every player on here played for Manchester United youth team. Marcus Rashford is 25 years old, or 26 now. Pogba, Lingard, they're 30. They played on the same pitch in a cage twice a week for as little as half an hour. They learned from each other. When Pogba was 16, he was playing in the same cage as Marcus Rashford when he was 13 or 12. Experiential learning. Man United, fantastic academy for things like that. All these players here, all from the same area of London, when there's the most amount of street football pitches in London. 14% of the Premier League players that are English come from this one part of London. Street football. Paris has the most amount of World Cup players to date, whether that mean from France or some of the North African countries, some of the West African countries. They have the most amount of players have come from Paris. Unstructured street football. Many benefits of messy play. These are the results of a 4v4 pilot scheme Manchester United done and showed versus 8 versus 8. There was 135% more passes, 260% more goal scoring opportunities, 500% more goals scored, over 200% more 1v1 encounters and nearly 300% more dribbling. 4v4 versus 8v8. Small-sided stuff to really help actions and active learning time for players. And honestly, especially the weather we have in Finland, can we use the winter to be our friend and not our enemy and really utilise futsal? Because if you look at the 10 most expensive players in the world, 8 of them grew up playing futsal until the age of 13, 14, alongside football. 80% of the top 10 players in the world have played 4v4 futsal or 5v5 with the goalie. So I leave it with this quote from Bruce Lee. And any questions? Apologies, I've just spoke for an hour straight. It felt like 5 minutes. Any questions, please? And if you have, mics are available. If there's any of those questions that you had earlier at the start, if there's anything I haven't answered that you were curious about, please, you can write it in the chat. You can ask now. Yeah, there we are.
It was mind-blowing presentation.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Sorry if I was speaking too fast at times. When I get passionate, I start going.
So, is there anyone who would like to ask something now?
Or anything from yourself, Yanni, that you wanted me to clarify more or discuss?
Well, is there something now? Yes, the slides. I will send them. I will send them afterwards. Yes, absolutely.
For sure.
Maybe if there's no questions, I would like to maybe try to summarize this somehow, because so many points, so many important things, especially for the children's coaches, that we have to bear in mind that we don't need finished products when they're 9, and that is a huge thing, because it's a long journey, and we need to build environments for the kids that there's a lot of movement, lots of touches on the ball, learning by doing, and especially we need to, is the right word, cherish the play.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't go wrong with those simple tips. Small-sided games, include goals, more goals, especially here in Finland. As we have also noticed that there are quite few goals used, and of course there are. Your observation said that the ball rolling time was quite low. You had 70% the target in England. In our observations, we have found quite similar, something like 50-60%. So that is definitely something we need to look into, get that percentage higher. So that's maybe my trying to summarize this. Yeah. So individual tools, the main thing.
Thank you. I think we had a question in the chat. Insights, please. Yeah, about individual targets in the session. Thank you for the question, by the way. I appreciate it. Always good to get interaction. I feel 100% is great to give player objectives within the session. What I would advise is to try and be process-based with the objectives. You know, so we want the player to score. For that player and their specific needs, what is it specifically that might help them score? So if it is that they don't open up their body and run towards the goal more enough, or have an intention that I want to run in behind, so it's all right, rather than facing my own goal, I need to open up and realize I can see the space behind, you know. So that might be the first objective. Try to see both goals when possible, you know, and then maybe you take 5 minutes where you really focus on that player. So you put the spotlight on that player and you say, all right, there was this many moments where you could have faced your own goal, this many where you did, and you speak to the player about that. And maybe when they're not opening their body and seeing the space, you just remind, hey, have a look. Oh, yeah. You know, so it's about definitely 100% setting those with the player objectives, but trying to think about the process of the objectives. If that makes sense.
Then there was a question about was there a formula to calculate that ball rolling time? So what is your approach to it?
Yeah. So what I'll do is I would start a clock when the ball is involved in the training session. And then So that could be a passing practice, the players moving with the balls, or I'll start the clock. And then if, for example, the session stops where there's clear dead time in the session. So that could be, look, if a coach goes in and says, stop, make sure you move the ball a little bit quicker here and gets out, I'll keep the time going, you know. If they start taking more than up to 10 seconds, that is getting stopped because they're taking a bit of time here now out of the players learning. So I'll stop it. And then when the ball starts rolling again, I'll start the time. And then if they go, all right, stop, drinks break, time is stopped. So whenever there's relevant dead time in the session, and if it's, okay, stop, we're going to move on to this practice, and now the coaches are setting up and the players are kind of left not really doing anything, it's stopped, you know, or if it's a brief or a debrief, you know. So that's the ball rolling time, how I would do it.
And then there's comment from Taru. Taru thinks that this is not exactly the info when talking about grassroots level. Maybe I would say something first. I think the info is for everyone because we're talking about the fundamentals and how we get kids involved in the game and fell in love with football. And that comes from doing, playing, a lot of action, enthusiastic coaching and stuff like that. So I wouldn't separate if we're talking about elite academies or grassroots level here in Finland. I think the fundamentals are always the same in football. Do you have a comment on that?
No, I think it's just, you've answered it spot on. It's a real spot on answer. It doesn't matter if it was a maths class or you have to learn the fundamentals, but your level of where they might be at might be different. At the end of the day, it's part of education, and also it's about them having that love for the game, you know. And I reckon if all of us went and put on our kits, and even at our ages, went and we started a session, and all of a sudden we get into it and the coach says stop, we all go, oh, bloody hell, you know. Is like, we even have it as coaches, or we might have had a little picture and the coach said stop. Especially the worst one is when the player's done something well and then they go to shoot and the coach says stop because they want to coach the defender. You know, about, yeah, so I think we've got to try and think about that. Timo, my good mate Timo, is there something in the behaviour of the coaches leading the training in general that you would like to change in Finland? Well, if it's you leading the coaching team, I wouldn't change anything because you've got some passion behind you, mate. But everyone's different. I think there are some coaches that are going to be a little bit more reserved and a little bit more analytical. But I feel like if we have mirror neurons right in the brain, where the people you are around most or the people you maybe look up to, you kind of mirror them naturally. So if you're thinking you want our young players to love the game, then you have to be excited about the game, you know, and you might be a certain way. I'll be honest, when I'm not talking like this about football and when I'm not coaching, I'm quite a quiet person, but this is what I love. So I almost become someone else, you know. So it's like when I'm off the pitch, I'll be Eddie off the pitch. But when I'm on the pitch, it's like, because I love ball so much and I want the players to learn so much and I want them to feel the love that I have for the game, like I show it. Even when I don't feel like it, I show it, you know. And that's, I guess part of coaching. So I think there's definitely got to be a certain level of enthusiasm at sometimes. And that don't mean scream and shout all the time, because then it just becomes noise in the player's head, noticing when to step back, let them go for a little bit, be silent, and then go in. And, you know, and then noticing that every player is different and the way you go in and speak to them has to be different. And that comes from how well you know them.
Then there's one question.
From
Maybe
Chris.
the final. Yes,
Yeah.
from Chris.
who are the best in the world at coaching this style? Could it be a different sport? Poof, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I'd say if the style you're referring to is kind of constraint based, letting the game flow, being processing individual with the way you work, I would say there's good things everywhere. And I mean, I saw amazing things in Argentina about how they train and how they're always intentional and always work towards the goal, you know, and they'll have like multi actions in their training where the players really have to think a lot. And I've put a lot of that into the way I train. But I'd say probably overall, like Sporting Lisbon are the only club to have 2 Ballon d'Or winners come to it. And when you go there, it's no surprise they've got a real clear identity, a real clear intention of what they want to achieve and what a Sporting Lisbon player looks like. And you know what a Sporting Lisbon session looks like loads of ball work, loads of small-sided stuff, really pushing the players physically. One of the hardest sessions I've seen was on a Friday, the day before a game, and I thought I pushed the players hard. That was crazy. So yeah, I'd say I like Sporting, but maybe a different sport, Chris, as well. We can always study and learn and see. American football are interesting.
Lauri is asking about teaching passing for the first time, let's say under 7 years. Yes, under 7s. What do you recommend, implicit or explicit way of teaching when it comes to passing at that young age?
Yeah. Put a gate there. Pass the ball through the gate. They can't pass it through the gate, make the gate a bit bigger. Once they get that, if they're passing with their toe, can you find another way to pass with that? Can you show me? You know, what they pass with the inside and it's accurate. Wow, how does that feel? Oh, that feels quite good. Yeah. It rolls more with the inside, doesn't it? All right. Where could you put how can you get it into that gate? All right. Where was your body facing then? Did it go in the gate when your body was facing there? So what do you have to do? You know, and then help them find their way. And then rather than telling them sometimes and making feel, I've got to do this, you help them discover and then they feel good, you know. And then once they can pass it through those gates, increase the distance, reduce the size of the gates, or get them moving now with gates, or get them with a passing practice, but with the gates. So it's clear. Because if you pass the ball without the gates, especially when they're younger and it goes over here, the player moves, you get away with it. The external feedback isn't there. You know, so I'd say a bit of a mix, but as much as you can where they're discovering. Well, thank you for the questions, guys. It's the most amount of questions in a presentation I've done in Finland.
Really?
Hi, Joe.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much. Oikein lämpimät kiitokset kaikille osallistujille. Tämä oli ilo. Teitä oli todella paljon paikalla. Tallenne tulee, materiaalit tulee, so we will send the material later. And thank you, Eddie. It was great having you here. And let's all keep in mind that let's be future orientated with the kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice midsummer. Have a nice summer, everybody.
Take care all. Thank you very much.